Whoa, hello friends, David Vos here. Hope you're having a great day. It's another beautiful day in Oklahoma. One of those dreary winter, days. A little foggy and cloudy. Hopefully there'll be some sunshine tomorrow, because I love the sunshine. I don't know, something about sun. But I don't mind a little dreariness once in a while, because then you really appreciate that sun when it comes out. But this look is a little gothic, don't you think? And that's all right. But I guess I get tired real quickly of the dark, damp winter. I like it a little bit here and there. It's good to keep you on your toes. Well, friends, yesterday we did a video, and I tried very hard to, I'm trying to get it down so that we literally and completely understand it. Now, you might think, well, how long is this going to take? Shouldn't we be able to understand the Bible a little easier in this day? I mean, how, somebody said in the comments something to the effect that I'm, more or less trying to bend the words to try and fit it the way I want it to. That's not what we're trying to do. Let me explain what I mean. I'm not trying to look at verses in the Bible and say, well, now it doesn't agree with what I say or what I believe, so I'm going to twist the words a little bit so that we can get it to fit. That's what people do who do not know the whole truth. But they're wrong about some things. So they'll find verses that seem to fit with what they believe. Now, I'm not saying they're bad people. I'm just saying that's the best they can do. That's what they believe, and they've got these 4 or 5 verses that, tell what they believe. But then they got a couple verses over here, and they're like, well, now I don't really know how that fits with what I'm saying. That's all right. Hey, nobody knows everything. I'll just kind of shove that aside. Or if they do try to understand it, they'll just say, well, let's twist it a little bit. We'll just go in there and we'll find another meaning for that word, and we'll kind of get around it. Trust me, that's not what I'm trying to do. I was raised in an organization with, as many of you have been, whether it's the worldly ways or some religious view. And just about everybody is twisting something. You got lawyers, they're like, well, I believe in the government, Dave. What about all the poor people dying down there in the street? Well, this is the best system, capitalism, that we have in the world. And, it's the best we can do, Dave, So they just try to get around it. But see, there is a system. There is an understanding that fits everything together. Now, in that system, there could be some suffering. But we know, when you got the true understanding, why there's the suffering. You know how it fits and why it's there. You don't ignore it. You don't try to excuse it. You have to understand why. So in the true system that we're going to, first of all, if the Bible is true, it's going to be, first of all, consistent. It's not going to be a bunch of books put together, micmash, some people who in past times maybe disagreed and we're throwing it all together and trying to sort of synchronize it. We're not synchronizing falsehoods. We have to synchronize it only because we've gone thousands of years. We're getting the same truth from different sources. Now, what we want to know is it really the same truth, or are we just trying to force it together? And I'm telling you, the ancient esoteric wisdom that came from the ancient priesthoods, they do tell a truth, a story. As we've said, it's astrology. That would be one word we could use to try and explain what it kind of is. It's the eschatology, or an understanding of the universe that we don't really grasp today. Therefore, it's a little hard to understand, because with Christianity today, we're taught to read the Bible in English. There's a lot of these words that aren't making sense. Let me give you an example. We just read yesterday in Matthew chapter 5, I think in verse 17, where Jesus said, "Don't think that I came to destroy the law, but to fulfill." For truly I say to you, until heaven and earth pass away, not one smallest letter or one jot or tittle. I mean, what is a jot or a tittle? Like, tittle is the way they used to say to dot the I, which I think is kind of a little bit weird because dotting the I sounds more like the jot, right? But the jot wasn't really the dot. The jot was more like actually the crossing of the T. And the crossing of the T sounds a little bit more like the tittle, the T. So it sounds like it's backwards, but it's actually, these words have come down to us to represent when people were writing, the smallest little iota is the Greek word. The smallest letter in the Greek language was the iota. And so that's where we get the word jot, iot. So the word dot is completely not even the same. You know, in English we put a dot over the I, and we say, well, that kind of sounds similar to the jot that's there written in the Greek, but it's really iot or the iota. And so there is just the smallest little particle of the English or the Greek letters. Anyway, in other words, what it's saying is the law of Moses, not only is it not going to be just done away, but every little jot, crossing of the T, dotting of the I, every smallest, the thing was completely carefully crafted. It's there for a reason. Now, until it goes away, it's in force, and you're not going to destroy it. That's what he's saying. He said, well, I don't understand how the heavens and the earth could pass away. What are you talking about? Again, we don't understand ancient cosmology. When they said that first of all, the word passing away is not translated correctly because it doesn't say passing away in the Greek. It says to pass by. Not to pass away, not to be done away, but to just pass by. So the heavens will pass by. You know, the Apostle Peter talks about the heavens that are now are stored up for fire. And again, all these words got to be parsed. We've got to understand, because they didn't understand astrology. The heavens, well, Revelation talks about the heavens departing as a scroll. What? What is it talking about? There's a little bit of symbolism in there, but you wouldn't even understand the symbolism if you didn't understand the cosmology. They understood the ruling authorities as the elemental. Galatians, the Apostle Paul talks about the elementals. And we're like, well, we get the word elements, and you might say some people translate the rudimentary principles. But you see, that's kind of misleading because they had a specific meaning for that word, even though it could mean rudimentary things. So there are translations today that translate that the elemental spirits. Now, I don't know that it should be translated because the word that way, because there's no word spirit there. But when they said the elementals in those days, in classical Koine Greek, they lived under a world of astrology. And they knew that there were these ages. In our Greek, it's called aeonians. And each aeon, Jesus talked about they won't be forgiven in this age or in the age to come. So there were these ages, and they had a specific length of time. Each of the ages was calculated, as we said. We've got the clock, we've got the calendar, and we've got the astrological time. The astrological time, you could find out what time it was in the history of mankind, in the prophetic, because the stars were a prophecy, and at the same time, they were these elemental or these rudimentary principles. Now, in one place, the Bible calls them the archons. And they were the Greek word principle is the Greek word, the word we translate principle is from the Greek word archon. So they had all these words in their Greek that we've translated into English that we're not getting. What it meant in those days was that there were these archons or powers. principalities, not necessarily principles. Like it's the root of the word is principle, rudiment, element, but they weren't just the little elements of that we know today, like, atoms and things and smallest particles. But what they meant by that, in this case, is the principalities and the archons. So when Paul is saying, we got to get beyond these rudimentary or elementary things of the law, he wasn't really saying it almost fits as if he meant the law was just the rudimentary principles. But what he's really saying is that the universe is built on certain principalities that govern. Now, they may very well be principles, but they're much bigger than little principles. They're the actual powers, principalities, thrones, and dominions that rule over the world. Where were they? They were in the sky. The heavens ruled over the earth. So that's why Peter talks about that when the heavens are burned up, and we're going to explain why and what he meant by that, the elements being intensely hot. That's how the New World Translation translates it, with burning heat in the King James. He says, the earth and the works therein shall be discovered. The works therein. So there'll be a new heavens and a new earth, according to Revelation chapter 21, according to 2 Peter. And this is what Matthew chapter 5 is talking about. The passing away, or not the passing away, but the passing by of the aeon, the age, and the archons that rule over the 12 houses of the zodiac. And each one, as it passed by, then the gods or the elemental principles or the archons that ruled over that age would pass. And then a new age would come. And that's what they're talking about. And so when Jesus in Matthew chapter 17 says, I'm not going to destroy the law, imagine the law as the form of government, at least on the earth. Okay. Now remember that there's the worship of angels, Paul says, or these principalities or archons and elementary or the powerful dominions that rule, or the principalities that rule over it. And so the law was on the earth. The powerful forces, astrological forces that ruled over the world then were in the heavens. And so he says, so when you're looking at this, he's not going to be able to, Jesus is not going to destroy the law of this world, but he's going to come and make a new world. He's going to be the ruler of the next age. So he's saying, I'm not coming to destroy the last age. I am the end of that. I am the completion of that age, and I'm going to rule the next age in the coming age, and we're waiting for his coming, his parousia, his presence. So he says, I didn't come to destroy it. It was fine for the age in which it was, when men were carnal. We were under the guard, as it said, or the steward of the law. And then he says, now some translations say, sooner would heaven and earth pass away, making it sound like he's saying it's never going to pass away. Because in our language, we might think that heaven and earth can't pass away, Dave. So that's sort of an analogy saying, look, it's not going to pass away. Sooner would heaven and earth pass away than anything of the law pass away. No, he's not saying that. He's saying, yes, the heavens and the earth that are now, that are reserved for fire, that are passing by with a hissing noise, as Peter says, being on fire, and the elementary or the principalities being dissolved, rolled up like a scroll, they're going to pass by. Then Christ will rule, and this other heavens will depart. So it says, so it's not translated correctly when it says sooner would heaven and earth pass away. It doesn't have the word sooner in the Greek. It just says when, until, that's the Greek word, until heaven and earth passes away, the law stands. Okay? That's why Jesus came and had to die. We all came here and were born in the flesh, bound under the law, just as Jesus was. So he says, then no one can loose those laws. That's what that's talking about. There are just, in order to understand this, we really got to grasp that this is something that is all the way through the New Testament. If we don't know that the Bible is based on astrology, and we don't know what these words mean, I mean, think about it. When we were nominal Christians, whatever denomination you may have been in, you read the Bible and you saw this thing like, oh, the end of the world, and never knew that the word they translated world there. Now, there's a couple of different places or words in the Greek they translate the world. And sometimes they're talking about the word cosmos, and that is the heavens or the entire system of things. And that wouldn't necessarily mean that it's going to disappear or be destroyed, but that the system that rules over us. So in other words, there's a certain principality that rules over us in this age. So that heavens will pass away. Those rulers, those archons, will be rolled up or they will be destroyed. We're not aware of that. And so we see the word, and so sometimes they translate this word aeon as world. The world is passing away. And no, that's talking about the age is passing away. See? So they didn't translate it correctly. If we had a Bible that was translated correctly, now you say, well, why don't somebody just do that, Dave? Well, they've tried. But no one has ever really grasped the meanings. First of all, people didn't know. They've lost all of this. Remember we talked about Newton was trying to study this ancient esoteric wisdom and bring it back. But he couldn't even reveal it at that time because they would have excommunicated him and probably executed him. So he put his works down in vast books, and they say he wrote something like millions of words, thousands of pages and thousands of pages, vast works. But he did not even publish them to the world because he would have been excommunicated and killed. So he hid them up, and they came forth, as did many other great and amazing works in the latter days. However, we find out that by looking at this ancient knowledge, he was able to understand things about gravity and motion and physics that we don't grasp today. We're just catching up because we were never allowed to know this information. So in the last 2,000 years, we didn't know that the Bible is talking about the god Uranus and the titans that were thrown in. We're like, what is this, all mythology? No, this is talking about the actual powers, astrological powers, and these beasts of Daniel and the beasts of Revelation. We don't know what that means. And so we don't realize that there are actually animals and beasts. A zodiac is the zoo, and each of these beasts come and go. So Daniel starts off with a lion. That's Leo. And that's like 14,000, 15,000, 16,000 years ago when Leo ruled. And we're going to explain that. I don't know if we'll be able to explain all of this in this video. We'll probably do more videos on this because it's a very big subject. But then he talks about a ram, or a ram that comes up and begins. That's Aries. That's the days of Christ, Aries. And that's the time when the little horn comes up and all of these other things. And then in Revelation, you've got this great monster with 10 horns. And that's, of course, the Holy Roman Empire, which is the great big monster. So the Bible then can be taken and understood in many different ways. God in his great wisdom put several layers. In other words, he'll have an interpretation of the tribulation being exactly 3.5 years and something that happens to fulfill it. But unbeknownst to those people in those days, they wouldn't know that those 3.5 years being 1,260 days would actually be a day for a year. And then there would be another fulfillment that would last 1,260 years. Well, that's a long time. That's crazy, Dave. Well, history's long. But there's another interpretation. And that is that the whole astrological wheel, there's 12 houses, it's all based on 60, right? 6 times 6 is 36. There's 360 degrees, 60 minutes, 60 seconds, 12 houses, 7 days in a week, 52 weeks in a year. So you've got 7s and 6s and 10s, and all these fit in this beautiful timetable that is not just for our clock or our calendar, but for our astrological. See, this was all hidden because we didn't know the future. We didn't know prophecy. This is what prophecy is. The ancient esoteric wisdom is prophecy. In other words, the understanding of as it's written, history has been written before it happened. It's in the stars. They're all by destiny going to rule and reign according to the times, the Bible says according to their own time. That's why Daniel could write all of this. He was talking about the beast or the zodiac, and it's all destined to happen. So by inspiration and understanding this astrology, they were able to write it down in astrological terms. For somebody who knows astrology and eschatology and the Greek and a lot of things you got to know, then when you read it, you're like, oh, I get that, But if you're divorced from all of that and you're living under an idolatrous system like we are, where we believe that God's a bearded man in the sky, and he's up there with a rainbow, and and Jesus is coming on a horse with wings, and he's got a sword out of his mouth, and the dead are gonna come up out of the graves, right, clawing their way out of the dirt. Then you see, we're never gonna understand any of this, and that's why we haven't got an understanding of this. So, So we've got these words like aeon that need to be translated perhaps age rather than world. Cosmos to be translated perhaps the system or the order of things as it is. The entire cosmos, its system and its arrangement. We've got words such as, principality that we don't understand, and rudiments and elements and all these little words that we're not sure about, that they haven't translated correctly. So nobody could come along and to this day and translate it right. You say, well, then the Bible's no good. It's all wrong. It's all translated wrong. No, the words are true as God inspired them. But the scribe is a liar. Jeremiah 8:8. You think you have Torah? You don't have Torah. You have the lying pen of the scribe. The scribe then is the one who writes it down so that you can read it. What came out of the prophet's mouth was true. What the apostles said was true. But we've got people that don't understand that we're under different ages and different laws and different kingdoms and administrations. So the law then is going to pass by, and we're going to have a new system. Same way of looking at it would be to say the heavens. If you look up in the stars, these animals are going to, the dragon that's in heaven is going to pass by. He's going to be thrown into the bottomless pit. And if you don't know where that's at, it's an entire science, an eschatological view of the whole world. The beast rules and reigns in the darkness at the bottom of the wheel. So, you've seen this affects everything that we understand in the Bible when we're reading it, and we're saying, well, what does it mean when the disciples said to Jesus, when will be the end of the world? Well, there's not going to be an end of the world. Well, the heavens are going to be burned up, Dave. See, this has been this big fight. Christians taking it literal, some saying, well, I can see that there's a verse that says something about a new heavens and a new earth. Surely God's not going to actually create a new universe. So people thought, oh, then it's symbolic, and they kind of got it, but they never really got it, like Jehovah's Witnesses and some of these others, because they didn't grasp what really actually is going to be done away. And then many of them couldn't grasp, because they didn't know that. They didn't know what Matthew was talking about in chapter 5 when Jesus set up his kingdom, which that age passed away in 70, and there was a generation that he talked about, and all the apostles and Jesus talked about how it was going to be passing away. So in Matthew 24, where he says Jesus was departing on his way to the temple, and his disciples walked up and said, "Hey, look at the buildings of the temple. Behold all these things. Truly I say to you," Jesus says, "by no means will a stone be left upon a stone and not be thrown down." And so his disciples said, "Well, tell us, when will these things be? And what will be the sign of your parousia?" Greek, parousia, not the sign of your coming. But, if each of these kingdoms rule, then you're going to come and you're going to have your reign. So what will be the sign that you're reigning? Jesus said it's not going to be like a man that comes and people say, "Lo here," or "Lo there." You see, not observable with the eye in that sense. So they were looking, well, then what is the sign so that we know? See, because the world's not going to be destroyed. You're not going to go, "Oh, look at the fires on the earth and it's all burned up. We're all dead. We're all, oh, look, a new heavens, a new earth." That's not how it's going to be. So Jesus said, in verse 35 of Matthew 24, he said, "Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will by means not pass away." Again, that word means pass by. Because the heavens aren't going to pass away. They're going to pass along. They're going to move like a scroll. And so you've got all these verses. In Luke 16:17, it talks about it. Pretty much, if we look up some of these verses, I think we'll get a better understanding and be assured that this is what it's really talking about. It says, Luke 16:17 says, "Indeed," this will prove that Matthew 5 is what we've been saying. "Indeed, it is easier for heaven and earth to pass away than for one particle of the letter of the law to go unfulfilled." Now, if you look at that in the Greek, it doesn't say that. It's saying that until heaven and earth passes away, none of the law or that system or those rulers, they have their reign. They have their appointed times. And this is why the Bible calls it appointed times and seasons, all the way from Genesis, when he says he made the sun and the moon and the stars, and he appointed them over days and seasons and times. Luke 21:32 says, "Truly I say to you, this generation will by no means pass until all things occur. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will by no means pass away." So you see, he was talking about the generation, and we know it was 40 years, because when Jesus said that, he was 30 years old. He had just been baptized to start his ministry. And so he's saying, I'm going to keep on going. My words are going to keep on. My law is, you're going to keep my law in the next age. So mine's going to keep going. And this heavens that rule over you now, they are going to pass away. But he says it will be in the next generation. It's going to take 40 years. And that's why he said, looking at the temple, not one stone shall be left upon a stone. He's saying, look, this is going to happen. And it did in history. In the year 70, Titus Vespasian came in, fulfilling the role of Antichrist at that time, in that literal fulfillment with 3.5 years. Revelation 21:1 There will be a new heavens and a new earth, wherein righteousness shall dwell. I think it's in chapter 6. It talks about the heavens being rolled up like a like a scroll. Now, here's another one that's interesting. 1 Corinthians 7, chapter 7 somewhere. Look at that. 1 Corinthians 7. I think it's verse 30 or something. This is really enlightening, this. Yeah, it says, moreover, verse 29, the time left is reduced. This is Paul in the book of Corinthians. So he's like in the year 60 or 70, right? Just before the destruction of Jerusalem. I mean, just a couple of few years, maybe the end of the 50s or the beginning of the 60s. So we're getting down to the time when this generation is going to be gone. Just a few years left. And that's why he says the time is reduced. It's, in other words, probably in Greek, that just means very little time left. And so people read that and they say, well, okay, we're still waiting for Christ to return. It's been 2,000 years. I don't understand what he's talking about. All right, because you don't understand all this stuff we've been saying. When he was looking, what he was talking about here is the end of that age. And so there in around 60, they had like 7 years left for the tribulation to arrive. And so he says, henceforth, let those who have wives be as though they had none. Man, this might have been 2 or 3 years before the tribulation was about to come. Now, they knew it was about to come because they understood astrology. They were apostles and prophets. They knew he said this generation wouldn't pass. And so they could see the times, the signs of the times. You know, the Romans were surrounding Jerusalem, and there were skirmishes and wars and rumors of wars, according to Jesus. So that's why they said that. They did, you know, the apostles, today you've got churches that say, oh, well, you know, we're living in the last days, so don't get married. Well, the Bible says and warns about people like that, forbidding to marry, forbidding to eat meats that are given by our Father in heaven to eat, that, you know, they're just putting us under these laws and things that go against the healthful teaching. They're not teaching the truth because they don't understand what they teach. And so when this scripture was given, he's not saying, I want you to be celibate. But because people lost all this information, because they burned all the books, they burned the Alexandrian Library, 295. Constantine, a pagan, came along, didn't know what he was talking about, and just for political reasons declared the whole world was going to be Christian now. And then they had these councils, and they didn't know what they were talking about, so they came up with ideas and put us under these laws. So they said, oh, well, look at here. It says, the time is reduced. So I guess that means the next 1,000 years, we're not supposed to get married. Verse 30, and also those who weep be as though who do not weep. Oh, so I guess that means, you know, you should be all proud and long-faced and, you know, don't cry, you know, keep a stiff upper lip. Don't help people and love people because, you know, we don't want to be crying about it, you little whiny baby. You know, don't you be whining, right? So this is how people got these attitudes. And he says, as those who rejoice as those who do not rejoice, and those who buy as those not possessing. Well, the end of that age was about to occur. These were people living in Palestine. The Romans were coming. They were about to destroy the city. And the greatest tribulation that had ever been known to mankind was about to occur. So, of course, if you're talking about a few months before your whole world's going to end, I wouldn't be worried about getting married or doing things like that or crying or weeping. I'd be trying to find a place to, you know, Jesus said, get thee out of her, my people, right? Don't come down off the housetop. Flee. When you see them coming, get out and flee. Woe unto the pregnant woman in those days. So that's what that's talking about. And then he says, and to those making use of the world as though not using it to the full. Because it says, the scene of this world is changing. Now in the Greek, that word scene is the Greek word schema. We have that word. I don't know why they don't just use the words that today we have these same words. We say, well, that's quite a scheme there, right? And that word means the form. Well, they translate it the scene. Well, that's kind of, you see something, that's the form. But it's too vague. What it's talking about is not that the physical form of the earth is going to change, but the form of the governments, the cities, the Jerusalem that is now, that is in bondage with her children, that's going to be done away. We're going to have another law and go into another dispensation of grace. And so there has to be the destruction, because what is meted out upon her shall be desolations, according to Jesus. So, Ephesians 2:2, then, with that in mind, can be understood, and we start to really get a grasp. Paul says, furthermore, it is you that God has made alive, because you were dead in your errors and in your mistakes. That's what the actual word means. It doesn't mean, oh, you're a sinner. Oh boy, you're evil. That's not what the word means. Sin means to miss the mark. If you're an archer, nobody can hit the bullseye every time. We practice in order to get good at it, but it has nothing to do with being perfect. It simply has to do with being good at what you do. And we're not always going to be born good at it. We have to practice. So this world, we have deficiencies. We're not evil. That's not what this means. There are people who are misunderstanding the Bible. It says, in which you at one time walked according to this world. That word is the cosmos, or the system of things, the order of things as it is today, the governments that we live under, not the world, right? So, according to the ruler of the authority of the air. Up there in the sky, there's a big angry guy with a beard? No. The ruler, that word in the Greek is archon. And if you go back and look at the Gnostics and see what they believed, they understood these archons to do with the astrology. And there were the 12 houses. And so we don't translate it because we don't understand it. So the archons are ruling over the air, in the air. And they're going to pass as we revolve in this calendar. And the ages will change. So the system of things as it is the way the world is formed and organized under this age, because of that particular archon or principality that rules over us, which is the astrological influences in the sky. So, you see, because we don't understand the truth, can't possibly understand the Bible. Colossians 2:8 is a good one. Colossians 2:8 says, look out, perhaps there may be someone who is going to, through the philosophy and the empty deception, according to the traditions of men, according to the elementary things of the world, and not according to Christ. Because it is in him, Christ, that all the fullness of the divine quality, or of God, dwells. See, God is the ruler that rules over us. So we're going to be ruled over the God of heaven. But there was a time when we ruled over the God of this world, which was the God from beneath, Jesus said. So here it says philosophy, or the teachings, that are empty and deception, because it's the age, it's a different age, the age of darkness that we used to live under. The law that was not going to give us life at all. And they're They're empty deception, and it was the traditions of men, and it says according to the elementary. Some translations today say elementary spirits. But again, that's that word, like these principalities or these rudimentary principles or principalities that ruled over us. They are the gods. But you see, those gods, as Galatians says, as the Apostle Paul says, Moses went up onto this mountain, but it's a different mountain. Remember? It's the mountain of Sinai. And that's why in Revelation, the woman, you see her, and she's adorned with the sun, and the moon is beneath her feet. So she's got the source of light around her and crowned with 12 stars. That's the zodiac. But she went through the wilderness. She had to be persecuted to give birth to that child. But when she overcomes, you see, she gives birth to the child, then the moon, or the lesser light, Shin, that's the Hebrew letter Shin, is the word moon. And so there were many countries that worship the Shin god, or the moon god. And that's even where they get the word Sinai, the lower part of Israel, the Sinai, or the lower part, or the moon is reflectory light. So it gives a little light to people in total darkness, but the sun does much better. When you're out walking around at night, if you don't have the moon out, you'll fall down. But look how much better it is when the sun comes out. Then you really know the truth. Then you know what you're looking at, right? If you're outside walking around with just the moonlight, you don't know if there's flowers around, we don't know if the grass is green. It's all kind of opaque, and you don't know if it's green or what color the flowers are. You might see a mountain in the distance or a tree. You might not bump into the tree, but you really don't know what you're getting into, which is moonlight. But once the sun comes up, oh howdy, now you've got the truth. Reality emerges. So the woman had conquered that dark night. The moon was beneath her feet. Now she was crowned with 12 stars. And he says, because we don't need to be under those elementary that Paul talks about in Galatians being the worship of angels, right? That he nailed to the cross, the law, the elementary things, or the rudimentary things of the world. Because we're going to follow Christ. And what is Christ? Well, in him dwells the fullness of God. See, the divine love, the Father from heaven. So, let's see. I kind of wanted to get into a little bit about, we talked about Newton a lot. Now, I haven't, eventually I want to get into some, we could take hours, and we're getting down to 43 minutes here. So I won't have time to really go into all the intricate details. Newton was a genius. He was literally the most brilliant. I mean, come on, 1740, or I think 1780, he published, well, he finished writing. He didn't really publish it. He published all this spiritual stuff that he wrote, I think in 1705. So that's a long time ago. In those days, remember, he didn't have a Google, he didn't have the internet. If he wanted to know something, he had to go to, he was a student at Cambridge, so he had some books, right? He had access to some books. But, when you got a book, you got to go through all the pages and read them all. It takes a lot of work. He spent his life trying to understand all this. And if you get off on the wrong foot and you don't understand what's going on, then, your foundation of thought leads you to these false conclusions. So it had to be built up because the Catholic Church had burned all this wisdom and knowledge. And now we don't understand our Bible. So we have a guy like Newton. It's like, okay, what does this Bible mean? And he finally realized, Christians today, Catholics, they're lost. That's the Antichrist. And he determined from the book of Daniel and Revelation that there were these beasts and these times that they ruled the world over. So, as I said, it's a system of, it's a very intricate system with a round wheel of 360 degrees. there's all these different numbers that come into play. You got 6. Can all be divided with 6. You got 6 times 6 is 36. You got the number 36 or 360. 12 goes in it. 3 will go in it. 9 will go in it because 3 and 6 is 9. And 7 will go into it because there's 52 weeks. 5 and 2 is 7. And that goes into it. So all these numbers, 4 will go into it. You can divide it into 4, the wheel. You got the 4 corners of the wheel. East, north, west, and south. And so just about every number can be divided, and that wheel represents everything. And so this is how it's this system that we use for clocks and calendars and astrological time is how we count not only time, but it's how we administer the law and the rulerships and the powers that be. So it's a very deep, deep subject. Now, the primary understanding of the book of Daniel and Revelation is astrology. So these beasts are talking about astrological beasts in the sky. When you're talking about it that way, we're talking about a period of 25,000 years is how long it takes for the entire astrological age from the beginning to the end. 25,000 years. Half of that time then would be like 12,600 years. Now, isn't it interesting? Remember how we said 7? There's 52 weeks in a year. Well, notice that Newton discovered, because the Bible says it, there's a little sort of a key given to us in the book of Ezekiel. If you use that key, there's another understanding, a smaller way to look at these prophecies. And we can understand the beasts as particular kingdoms on the earth from Babylon all the way down to our day. They were not the biggest interpretation of these symbols, because the beauty of it is that the Bible was written in such a way to explain the entire age of man for 25,000 years, and at the same time give you a little illustration of that whole period of time in a smaller example. So when Jesus was on the earth, he said, look, there's going to be 3.5 years in this great tribulation. Well, that can't be the tribulation he's talking about, right? Because that wasn't the greatest tribulation that ever occurred until now or ever will again, because it may have been, in a sense, right, to those people there in that time. But since that time, we've had world wars and so forth, and that's not the absolute primary meaning. So you take the 3.5 years, or sometimes it'll call it the 42 months. If you took that for a day for a year, what you'd have is 1,260 days. A day for a year is 1,260 years. So there is one interpretation where not the astrological governments ruling over us, but these beasts on earth that mirror them, these certain ones of these kingdoms are destined to rule for this little type or shadow. Remember, the Bible, the literal meaning of the Bible is a type and a shadow. So when we read about, and Newton, he studied all the measurements of the Solomon's Temple and the pyramids, and he found that when they made these pyramids, they represented the entire universe and cosmos. These measurements. Now, he had to be a genius to figure all that out. And today, scientists are studying the pyramid, and they're like, wow, all these, it tells you how many times the earth goes around the sun and how many days in the eclipse, and it tells you the axis tilt, and it's the exact center of the geographical locations of the earth, and it's all this stuff that's put in there. Well, all that was put in Solomon's temple, and it's all the measurements and all that's written in the Bible. So if you take those numbers and apply them to bigger things, to more profound things as a type or a shadow of something else, And so this temple is the world, not just that little temple. As above, so below. In other words, not only is it true for the entire universe, it's true of your entire body. Within you is the entire universe. So you can apply it to different and various things. So there's multiple ways you can understand the Bible. If you're looking at Exodus and you're looking at the whole, thing about the temple and all that stuff, you can understand it as an astrological timetable for the whole world, or you can look into it and find that it explains your entire body. See? So sometimes in the New Testament, it'll kind of go back and forth to several of these meanings. But usually, whenever the inspired prophet speaks of something, it has multiple meanings. So, here's what's interesting. If you go by the day for the year thing, what are you doing? Well, you're multiplying everything by 360, because a year has 360 days. So 7 times, or 7 years, is now 7 times 360. And that comes out to be 1,260 years. But remember, we talked about the Sar, the Sumerian Sar, which was 3,600 years. Now, why would they have a measurement of time that's 3,600? Because, you see, the year is 360, but the astrological is much bigger because it's a longer period. So 7 times 3,600 is 25,000 years. And so here's what's interesting. So 7 times 360 is 2,520. 3.5, or times and a half a time times 360 is 1,260. But 7 times 3,600, so that's by 10. You multiply it by 10. You get 25,200. That's how long it takes for the entire wheel to go around. So when you've got the Bible talking about the 7 times, it's really talking about the entire history of mankind for 25,200 years. But then it gives you a little smaller example, and that's the history that's in the Bible as we have it. Not from the beginning of the 25,000 years, but it just tells you the basic history for the last for 2,520 years. And all these prophecies in Daniel, Revelation will fit within that 7 times. So most of the prophecies in Daniel and Revelation have to do with the 1,260 years. Well, that's only half of the time. What about the other time? Well, the other half, remember, is the 70 weeks. 70 weeks are determined upon thy people. 70 weeks is 490 days. Okay? A day for a year would be 490 years. And that is supposed to be the time from the going forth of the call to restore and rebuild Jerusalem until the Messiah. So, if you go back in time, you will find that Artaxerxes issued a decree, and they went back in the days of Ezra, and it shall be rebuilt, and there shall be a moat and a wall, according to the book of Daniel. And so you start from a specific date from Artaxerxes' call to restore and rebuild Jerusalem, and it goes all the way down unto the true Messiah, who came and was born and was baptized in the year 30 CE. That's 490 years. Now remember, the 1,260 years starts from the time that the little horn shall arise. Well, the little horn of Titus Vespasian, who was just a small representation of it, who went in and destroyed Jerusalem, that's only a smaller type and a shadow. And that 3.5 year period was actual days, or actual 3.5 years. The longer one is going to be a different horn. That little horn of Titus Vespasian is going to be representative of another little horn who's going to be much more powerful and is going to last for a longer time. It's going to be a day for a year, 1,260 years. And so that's going to be at the end, or you're going to have to try and figure out when that happened in history. And that's what Newton did. And he found that with all of the Daniel giving you this horn, this king and that beast and this, and he put it all together and shows that it all comes down, the 10 horns being the Vandals, the Hurlus, the Visigoths, and anyway, all these kings that come up, they're 10, which is the Roman Empire. And then, which would be then the dragon, okay, with the crowns on the heads, and the beast that is, and there's 5 that have fallen, one is, the other is yet come. So these are successive beasts, all the way from Assyria and Babylon, Media, Persia, Greece, and then Rome. And then we have these 10 horns that are on this dragon. Then it says there's another beast that rises up, and he lasts for 1,260 days. But he's basically going to be led by this little horn that is different than the other 10. The 10 horns were on Rome. Rome wasn't Christian yet. It was starting to become Christian, but the Pope didn't have any temporal authority yet. So this little horn had the eyes and the mouth of a man to speak blasphemies, and to be a prophet and a seer, and to be a priest king, and to declare and speak blasphemies and say that he is God and sit in the temple of God. But that's not the final result of final revelation of who the Antichrist is, but it was one interpretation or one fulfillment, who would last 1,260 days. So the Holy Roman Empire by Charlemagne commenced in the year 800, and that all ends in the year 2060. Now look at this. You have 800 years then from Christ to the Holy Roman Empire. You have 490, which goes up to the year 30. That means you have 460 BC. 800 years on to that is what? 460 and 800 is 1,260. So you have 2 sets of 1,260, starting from the time that there shall go forth a call to restore and to rebuild Jerusalem, all the way until the little horn shall arrive, and then there'll be another 1,260 days, and that makes altogether 2,520 years. And all of these little 5 months and 42 months and all these little things that is prophesied in the Bible can all be applied to have happened between that time. And yet, still, in the greater scheme of things, is referring to 25,200 years. And when Christ came on Passover, which would be the beginning of spring, that would mark the time when half of it would begin. That would be the mark when that woman, in the larger scheme of things, would be crowned with honor and give birth to this child, because the child was Jesus. So, another thing that's interesting is that there's everything has many fulfillments. Even in the book of Revelation, you get down to this 1,000-year reign of Christ. Now, why would Christ reign 1,000 years? Well, remember, there's different ages. One age will come and another age will go. But Jesus isn't really one of the 12 houses. He's represented by the Son. So Jesus is going to rule all the way for 12,600 years, or the entire time that at the top of the wheel. So he doesn't have to stop. Well, that's 12,600 years. We've already come 2,000 years. So that leaves 10,000 years. Remember how we took 1,260 and times it by 10 to get the actual 12,600? Or 7 times 360 is 2,520, but 7 times 3,600, or the 2,520 times 10, which is 25,000, is the whole thing. So if you take the 1,000-year reign of Christ, which is one fulfillment, times it by 10, you get 10,000 years. So really, of course, Jesus isn't going to just rule this world for only 1,000 years. It's going to actually be, in the greater scheme of things, 10,000 years. And I know a lot of you are thinking, well, what? Are you saying that this entire book is saying of the world is the hour is near and it's all this, be urgent and yet now and then you say, oh, it's going to be 2,000 years before he arrives? That's not a short time. And now you're saying, oh, now it's going to be another 10,000 years? Well, because there's different times talked about. That's why we read that scripture where it says that there'll be a short time. Don't even get married. It's so short. Let those on the housetops not come down to go get their outer garment, but flee into the mountains. Don't even get married. Don't even worry. Those, woe to the pregnant woman. See, that's not going to be something we're going to do for the rest of our eternity. That's just something that you do before you see the sign. It was a critical thing. It was talking about a very small type and a shadow of the greater. So when we read Matthew 24, we know that we're looking at something much greater on a grander scale. It's another interpretation. And actually, there's several more interpretations. So one of the interpretations is this great tribulation that we've been going through for 1,260 years since the Roman Catholic Church came up. And of course, another 1,260 years all the way back to the days that Israel was scattered into all the earth and lost their hope. And these times shall be upon them. And it gives details of each little thing that's going to happen to each king that comes up. And so in one sense, we can track this all the way down to the year 2060, which will begin the reign of Christ. And for those who have eyes to see and ears to hear, it will be 10,000 years that it will reign upon this earth in that top of the wheel. So I see I'm over an hour here, and I always get to the place where I think I'm really getting into it, and then we got to go. But we've got to be able to understand this, so we've got to build it on one thing at a time so that we can completely understand this. We'll get back into it again tomorrow, and we'll give you some more information. And one day we're going to have all this information in our hearts and in our minds. We're going to understand this, and it's going to be great. Anyway, I'm going to go ahead and go. Hope you guys have a really great day. It's David Vos. See you again tomorrow. Have a good one.